All right, let's look at where South Africa is when it comes to housing. A check-in, as it were. Many citizens do still not even have a home, never mind electricity, which is our current focus as a nation. The hunger for land for housing is great, but the provision has been slow. The Housing Department has a backlog of more than 2 million households and title deeds. And of course, looking at the budget recently, to discuss, we're joined by Minister of Human Settlements, Mmamoloko Kubayi. Thank you, Minister Kubayi, for joining us. And you're actually in Niger. We'll talk about that, the Africa Regional Forum of Sustainable Development, looking at the sustainable goals, but also, of course, housing and cities and the like. But if we can start in South Africa, more than 2 million homes outstanding. That affects roughly 12 million people. Just give us the big picture. How are we here where 12 million people or more are out in the cold?
Good evening to you, Francis. Good evening to the viewers at home. I think the first thing around human settlements is to be able to understand that, yes, while we're looking at our backlog, as I continuously to say, when we look at our register, and that's why we went and talked about the need for us to digitize, the majority of the people that we are encountering that says they are needing in terms of the PNG or the RDPs, actually many of them do not qualify. And this is why. If you've owned a property before, our policy says that you do not qualify for a free housing. If you have a property somewhere, for example, you have a Mmamoloko who comes from Limpopo, has a property in Limpopo, stays in Gauteng. That person doesn't qualify even if they stay in informal settlements. Now, you do have some of the people who were married in community of property that have divorced while the property was both in their names as spouses. They do not qualify. If you earn a living above 3.5, you do not qualify. So we do have quite a number of people, Francis, that do not qualify in terms of what we are providing. Hence, a multi-pronged approach from the department to be able to respond to the challenges of housing backlog in the country. That's why you'd have seen last week we introduced and we launched the first housing finance program for those that are in the what we call missing middle, who earn a living. They are not it's not enough for the banks to support them, but it's more for those to qualify for an app.
Minister, before we get to the missing middle, can we stick to the poor, the very poor, the people who just want a roof over their heads? So you're saying there are a lot of illegitimate people on the housing list, but that doesn't explain why there's a huge backlog. Why don't you just kick out their claim on land or a house and carry on? Why is that any sort of excuse for an incredible backlog and slow provision?
Francis, maybe let's take this way. It's not an excuse. That's what I'm saying. There is quite a number of multi-pronged approach in terms of responding to housing need. Because you do have those who qualify for PNG. That's why I'm explaining. I'm explaining those who say we need a shelter, but do not qualify in terms of the policy. So we are not ignoring them as government. So our program, because sometimes people only know about one program and they think that only PNG is the solution for everybody. We do not have one size fit all solution. We have multi-pronged program, and that's why I'm trying to educate South Africans to say, if you are in this category, this is what you need to get as a solution. So for the indigent and for the most needy, those are the ones that we provide for PNG. And in terms of the backlog, as you say, correctly so, it's part of the problem that we have 1.9 units that are unfinished across the country. Now, when you look at the register, you'll find that somebody sitting on the register as having benefited. And that person is sitting there as having benefited because they were allocated a house, and the house that have been allocated has not been completed. And that's why part of the program in responding to that, we reintroduced completion of this, what we call blocked projects, that we started last year to bring back those projects into life so that allocation of resources is done and we can be able to have those that needs to be allocate, getting into the houses to be. We do have some of the projects previously, Francis, that were built, houses would have been built, but bulk was not in. There are several of them that I came across the country. That's why we took a decision to increase in terms of our human settlement development grant for provinces to be able to spend almost about 30%, which they were not allowed previously, so that they can be able to allocate to insert those bulk so that those houses can be released and be given to the public.
In 2020, it was reported that provincial governments were told to downscale the provision of housing. And the idea would be, and I remember the president talking about it as well, that sites would be provided, land, and people would build their own houses. The former minister even spoke about a sense of entitlement. This would give dignity, give agency. What is happening with that? We don't often hear of it spoken about. What is mainly being given to the very poor and vulnerable?
We are having a multi-pronged approach, and part of that is service sites. Let me clarify this. We can't do away with provision of BNG or RDP, free housing, because it's a constitutional obligation. I think one of your viewers actually wrote this. The Constitution says to us, we must provide a shelter for the most indigent and the vulnerable. These are senior citizens, so I can't say to a senior citizen, I'm going to give you a service site without a house. That would be unconstitutional. So we must give them a house. We can't say to the disability, people living with disability, that we will give them a service site. We must give them a shelter. And even the child-headed household. So it's a constitutional obligation. So that we continue to provide in terms of free housing. But what we have been able to do, as we say, my predecessor, Minister Sisulu, under her leadership as well, introduced the issue of service site, which we continue to roll out. You'd see in terms of our reports, Gauteng would have done more service sites. You'd see in terms of Northern Cape as well, more service sites have been done. So that, and as I keep on saying, we do not have one solution in terms of responding to the human settlements problems, but we are having a multi-pronged approach. First, provision of BNG for those who are needing the RDP. Secondly, provision of service sites. Thirdly, provision of rental stock for those who are staying closer to where they work and they're wanting affordable rental space, we provide. And also subsidy for those, or grants for those who are purchasing affordable housing, so that they can be able to qualify. So we've got quite a multiple approach.
Minister, forgive me for coming in there. Please join us in future so we can have an in-depth discussion. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. We have to address something, and that is the fears of corruption, the speculation around the housing list. Since I've been a journalist, every journalist says to, we talk amongst ourselves and say, who's seen the housing list? Who can actually find a good representation of the housing list? It doesn't exist. That has led to claims of corruption. When will this digitization happen? And how do you respond to one of our viewers that just said categorically up to 80% of houses belong to illegal foreigners because of corruption?
That's not correct. It can be 80%. Firstly, as government, we do not give houses to foreign nationals. What we do experience is that the people we give houses to, as beneficiaries, correctly so, they tend to sell them to foreign nationals or rent it out to foreign nationals. When you send inspectors to go and check in these houses, then you are told, no, this person has gone to town. And this is one of the message I say when I do have Imbizo and community engagement, to say it's citizens that do this, and that's why we need to tell them to stop. It's partnership that we must work on, and that's why President most of the time says to us, let's do partnership between ourselves as government and communities. Secondly, in terms of the list, it does exist if you go to HSS, but I'm saying we need a more accessible, transparent, I agree with you, and that's what we have worked on. It has not been completed. I think in the coming weeks we'll come out and say when we will be able to launch it. I was hoping that before the end of the financial year we'll do it. I'm hoping I can still do it before the end of financial year. But if we can, we'll openly say this is what the glitches are.
Very quickly, there's innovation out there, houses being built in boxes. What do you hope to gain from this gathering in Niger?
Look, in Niger, Nima, in terms of the conference. What we're looking here is lessons learned out of all the countries. We are now reviewing our work as part of the SDG 11. How are we building better cities? How are we building sustainable communities? Now, part of what we are looking at is to say, how far have we gone? So UN Habitat this afternoon presented a report in terms of progress on SDG 11. We contributed to South Africa in terms of our work. We're doing fairly well in terms of comprehensive response, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Majority of the people are still finding themselves not having access to safer cities. The eradication of informal settlements and slums is part of the discussion. You'd remember that we hosted UN Habitat in the country, where we were launching the Global Action Plan as part of eradication of informal settlements. And our work in terms of upgrading of informal settlements, it's what we are reporting on, that this is what we are doing, and we are hoping that as we go, we'll be able to eventually, globally working together with global communities to eradicate informal settlements. Part of what we are observing is the migration across borders and also migration between rural and urban. But most importantly, what we're echoing as the sentiment is that no one should be left behind, whether it's within the countries or amongst continents.
All right, Minister, thank you for your time. Mameloko Kubayi, Minister of Human Settlements.